right, Johnny, thanks for coming on. This is second episode, and when I come back into the skim scene, you were one of the first sort of younger guys to welcome me back, and then sort of volunteer to come on my little podcast. And then, of course, before we get into it, why don't you go through that background of where you're from, how you got into skimboarding, and how all of that evolved into riding and working for Vic.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's a really cool thing that you're doing. I think right now the sport pretty much needs as much as it can get. It's in a very interesting place. I feel like there's a lot of directions it could go. But my skimming started when I was, 7 or 8? I guess I'll try to do a pretty quick timeline here. But I started in elementary school. I remember we used to have this thing called a jogathon, and it was like a kind of running race, but you'd also like get donations to go into like a purse that would get you some kind of awards or like a raffle. And I ended up winning Vic, I remember. And I remember like very distinctly, like it had a very cool airbrush art, and I was a little stoked on it, but it was giant for me. So I think I came in here and ordered the right size and just kind of switched it up. And I remember early days, like just sliding back and forth from side to side at like Salt Creek. And then I live up the street from Thalia and Laguna. I grew up in Laguna Beach. And it was just that scene where like, that's where everyone went to go surf and skim. And I just became one of those groms that went there almost every day, get dropped off at 10 and get picked up at sunset. And that kind of just became my thing. Didn't really start competing until I was probably in like the 12 to 14 age range. Never really did well until maybe 18 to 21 division, and that's when I got onto Vic. Really like rarely placed when it came to competing, but it was just something I loved to do. Morgan just spotted me at Oak Street, which was another just 2 beaches over from Thalia, where I used to hang out all the time. He came up to me and approached me, thought that I had some potential, and I came in here to talk to Vic, and they offered me a board, and been here ever since. Fast forward a few years. Let's see, I went pro when I was 21. On my trip to Portugal, of all places, I got sent to Portugal, which was insane to just experience that lifestyle. And I think that's when I caught the bug of just like, this is the coolest thing ever. And it was maybe almost too cool because I got hooked into just the idea of like, this is what it's like. I get to travel with all these guys. And that was my first trip that was like pretty much covered, which was insane. And yeah, it's a dream life really that I think, which I'm sure we'll get into, is you realize is a lot more difficult to experience for most than others. But I'm really grateful for all the opportunities I've had, and it's been a wild ride. And now here we are, 2021. I thought my skim career, if you even want to call it that, was going down slope, and I just was growing older and farther away from skimboarding. And as much as it was understandable growing into my later 20s, it was something that I knew I would always do, but maybe not take it seriously. And then this past year was a very big, almost surprise to myself that I could, still skim to a pretty decent ability, and then kept trying to push myself into I started filming a lot and just seeing what I could do and what I wish I could do more of. And it really got me focused on strengthening my weaknesses and really trying to get that A clip for, I like to go for wraps a lot. So it's really just getting that money one that stands out, or whatever it is that really, it got me on this new grind of just trying to stack media essentially as a writer. And I also love studying, if I didn't make it, why didn't I make it? And I almost like seeing that stuff more than anything else.
Yeah, I've talked to Chance about it's crazy to go through sort of that time period where it's almost like 2010 to 2020, but let's just say maybe 2015 was sort of a weird low point, and there really isn't a lot. Gio and Bill sort of have 10th Street more of on autopilot, and then Forever Skim wasn't around, and Pulse didn't stick around, and there was just not enough going on. And I kind of messed with Chance, you missed the golden era. But the reality is, as much as that might have been a decade of waiting for us, it's crystal clear that right now is a time to do all these things, to strike while the iron's hot. I mean, for anybody who's watching this and doesn't know, Blair has a clip on YouTube that has 73 million views. Gary has a clip on YouTube that has 23 million views. For the longest time, you probably remember, Brandon Sears had the most viewed video, and it just stayed there throughout. That was like 10 years ago. It stayed there throughout that whole time. And then now we're finally at the point where it's like something overtook it. And it wasn't, it's not viral because Blair has more coming. He has other ones that are like 10 mil, 5 mil. It's all coming back now. But I want to go back to talking about you specifically, your growth, because you're having like a little coming out phase in your skim career. Congratulations on the win, a win that was really well earned. I mean, it was a mix of both challenging conditions, but if you know what you're doing, really good conditions actually. So kind of a struggle, but feel free to walk us through that weekend and basically your approach to Santa Cruz, which has usually been a very difficult one to do because maybe you have your first heat in the morning and some like good waves and you're like, yeah, we could ride this out till whatever, and then you get into those like afternoon heats or whatever where the finals take place and most people fall apart. They really do just fall apart. But you just your wave reading is, a lot of people are talking about it and it's good that they recognize it. That is how you typically win events because it's so variable. Talk to us through that whole event, that heat, and what you saw, what maybe you thought got you to that first place mark.
It's I don't know where to begin. My biggest thing I'll put out straight front is I've always, up until maybe this last year, and I can go into why I think I've improved on this, but my biggest weakness has always been my mindset, I would say, and just how I instantly, there's a handful of names that I think if I get them in my heat, I immediately am like, oh, okay, well, hopefully I can get second, And I think I always that was how I viewed things. And honestly, it's probably the reality is most of those guys, I will admit, are better than me. But I've learned in competition that at least in that 10 to 12 minutes, whoever's in your heat all have the same opportunity. And like you were saying, I think the biggest thing and why a lot of these guys win is because they choose the best opportunity within that 10 minutes. And it's not any wasted time. And I think it's very easy to, for example, let's say I have a really bad start in my heat and I'm getting a couple low scores and I'm already getting frustrated and I'm already working against myself and then I already feel defeated. Whereas the difference between I could start really strong and then I feel a lot more comfortable. I feel like I can just play around and just build from where I'm already started. I think those are all things that, like, without overthinking it, which is another problem I had, and then try to overcome, is just staying focused and relaxed and waiting for your opportunity. You'll see these guys that, for example, Blair, Weber, they're very calm in their heats and they're hanging, they're waiting. They know these breaks. They know what to look for. They know where they're going to excel. And I guess that's something that I've been trying to focus on. And I try to forget so much who's in my heat and just focus on what's right in front of me. And I think that really helped me this year. I love the rituals that I'll do before contests. I get very into all that stuff when it comes to like dialing in my equipment and waxing my board a particular way and putting on a playlist that gets me fired up and watching 10th Street Bros or any type of video or like YouTube video that gets me fired up, and like all those things I've been doing forever. And that's just become like the night before or the week before, that's just part of my routine, that I get fired up and it gets me focused. And a big thing, I wouldn't say it's a secret, but like one thing in my heats when I did feel a little down or felt like I may need to pick things up is I kept reminding myself, like, I put in a lot of work this year outside of competition to really boost up my ability of what I can do on a skimboard. And I just kept reminding myself, like, you deserve this, And it's tough. I've never really been the type of person to really want to be that guy to like take home that championship, you know? And I still don't know if that's me, but it did feel good. It felt like I like worked for that, even though like that day may have whatever. Santa Cruz, I honestly I have never had that feeling of like, I can't believe this is all like panning out this way. Even from like how other heats went that I was nervous about, and like other people that I could have been up against, and it was just wild how things kind of just like fell into place the way they did, and almost to like, I was like, how is this even happening, you know? So that was a pretty cool feeling. What else could I say? I mean, I love, like, I've been going up to that place for the past almost 10 plus years, and it's just a special, like, most people wouldn't call it like their favorite conditions, but there's something about that place that I just love. The feeling, the energy, the people. 26 is a very special spot for me for whatever reason. It just reminds me of what I grew up on, like Daly and Oak Street, but a little better, you know? Just love the vibes up there, so it's really cool. It felt like it was something I really wanted. I think another thing that fueled me was just my close loss in the Vic. I really wanted to do well in the Vic this year, and like losing the way I did, nothing against anyone that I was against. It was just how things panned out. I was just fired up to like the next contest and next opportunity I got. I just really wanted to, for myself and not even against anyone else, just do well, you know? But
yeah, the Aliso event is what I wanted to go to next. Unfortunately, I don't remember quite the format of it, because one thing that is difficult with Aliso is, well, I should say difficult about skimboarding is you really can't guarantee what each contest is. I don't think the UST puts that kind of pressure where it's everybody has the same rules, and that's a good and bad thing, because you'll have a different event that maybe you can do well at with a different rule set or whatever. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, I feel bad for any competitor who isn't aware or is struggling to think about which event is like that. But Aliso has some other issues with it. I think it gets judged very differently. I don't think anybody will really argue against that. It's judged very differently, and then it's usually a struggle there every year. The conditions are a bit weird, even though it is just a generic shore break part, but it sucks because it's an event where like you want it to be good. You know the judges want you to just do some Aliso riding, like you've been doing lately. Get out to head high waves, get barreled, and then you get your nines. But that the event we just had was very difficult. But you've been putting so much work in, specifically at Aliso, to where you were performing really well, and I saw you come through those heats, and I was like, this is great. He's dark horsing straight through these heats. But I would say the same thing that I talked about with David. You get these weird situations where when scores compress too much, what happens is mediocre waves tend to get overscored, and then really good waves tend to get underscored. And if you push that enough, I think Aliso might have a higher wave total than some other events. If you push that enough, it's really not great, because you're maybe not rewarding those best rides, and I think there were some, I'll just say for you so that you don't have to say it, there were some underscored rides, and then if you want to talk about the other opponents, there may have been some overscored, but I don't even care about that. What I really care about is on a questionable day like that at Aliso being underscored. So I don't want to take you through that heat, but you were doing really well in that event. What was your approach to those difficult conditions mostly? And then let's just say next year, how would you maybe change your approach, knowing that that situation is just always on the board? It's always possible that happens again.
That's a good question. You know, right off the bat, the two things that were working against everyone was the wave count and the left-right rule. Don't disagree as much with the left-right rule. I do understand it a little more. The 5 wave count in those conditions, you're skimming completely different. I mean, and this is nothing against anyone that decided that. So if any one of those guys sees this, like, it's not talking against you. This is strictly just speaking as a rider that has to deal with that situation, and the waves aren't good. You're skimming to try and get something instead of skimming to your fullest ability. Instead of taking your time to really focus on those top 3 scores that you need, you're just looking for whatever you can get almost. And with honestly, like, and then specifically going into the heat that I had, I honestly am not, like, I saw what these guys were doing, and it got to a point where I was like, I either need a really good wave to come through right now, or I'm not going to make this heat, because I can't even, like, these guys are doing things that I know I can't do. So I'm not going to push and fall and try to compare to that, than going out of my not comfort zone, but just knowing what I know I can do and get those right scores. So overall, I wasn't unhappy with how I skimmed necessarily, considering how it was. I thought I skimmed okay. It was just, I mean, I think I lost by 0.02. So it was just a frustrating, like, it could have gone the other way for him. I could have got that 0.02 higher on one of my waves. You never know. But yeah, I mean, it's just, everyone wants it. And the first thing once you lose is like, now I got to wait till next year, And it's just something that, like, growing up on Laguna, I think the Vic's the only other contest that I, like, really would love to do well in, And besides that, I mean, if the tour were to come to a point that I hope it could come to again, I'd be interested. But I think for where I'm at now in life, I just don't have that drive to really, I don't know. And who knows, next week I could change my mind. I feel like I change my mind all the time. But right now, that's kind of how I feel. But yeah, I mean, it's just the 5-weight thing's tough, like I was saying. The left-right thing, especially in the amateurs. So if any of these guys watch this, I hope this inspires you. Like, I noticed a lot of people, everyone, pros and ams, saw that the best opportunities at that contest were these lefts. And everyone was going for those, and they were all getting solid 5+ scores. And the problem is, I think a lot of people, instead of realizing, like, okay, I got that base, now I need to get something on my right. And so many people didn't make their heats, including myself even, probably, because they didn't get that solid, and which was very hard to find. So I get it. But it's just something a lot of people aren't thinking about, is getting those solid rights when that right-left rule is in effect. The reason I don't mind that rule as much as the 5-wave rule is kind of similar to what David was saying on the last podcast. I think there's so much talent now within every rider from all over the place. You got all these East Coast guys that can do all these crazy tricks and errors and stuff, and then you mix in these guys that are good at riding waves. I think there's so much range. So the left-right thing isn't as crucial, I think, as it used to be, kind of like how it was just trying to avoid everyone from doing wraps and whatnot, like David and you guys were saying last time. But it's, yeah, I mean, I think there's room for improvement. I think if, regardless of East Coast, West Coast, the Vic, or whatever, I think if anything is going to be a part of the tour, I think everything should have the same rules and format, regardless of where it takes place. And that's just also coming from a rider's perspective.
Talking about skim going places, I know this might be the topic that's closest to your heart, where skim is going places, and then it all comes down to what you do with it. If you have an opportunity and you squander it, you might as well have never had an opportunity in the first place. And I think skim clearly has an opportunity right now. And for me personally, I'm looking around, and I'm not very active. I haven't been very active lately. I'm kind of looking like, who wants to do stuff? Somebody step up and do something cool. Make a new video platform, podcast. Somebody do something, and then it gets to a point where it's like, I will do it. Okay, it's like somebody has to do something. We'll start with, what is your opinion on this sort of resurgence? How are you feeling about where Skim is heading, where it's going, and then maybe you can touch on specifics of like, what do you want to see for the future? Let's just say 5-10 years. What would you like to see come out of skimboarding?
Firstly, I mean, this past year has been so interesting seeing where the sport is. A lot of it has obviously changed into this YouTube channel format with things like Skid Kids and Austin Keen's channel and these huge profiles that are able to kind of establish their own network and displaying the sport in a variety of ways, I think is awesome. And something I kind of miss a lot, which also David touched in on, is I miss full-length features. If you want to compare them to like 10 Street Bros or like Exiles videos, or one of my favorites back in the day was VIC, who I think Scott Stinnett made, if I'm not mistaken. And the reason I like those videos, a couple reasons. One, you get to see the riders' personalities, and I always thought that was really cool. I almost remember more like in between wave riding things of like certain things that may have happened between two riders or whatever than I do some of the waves. And I miss that stuff a lot. And I think there's some really cool characters in this sport that could bring that life back. And the other reason I miss those things is because, especially if it was after an event, it was something to go to as a group and as a community and as something to share and see. If you make a wave in that video, that like nowadays it's like everyone's getting clips on the daily basis, but like back then you would wait all year and maybe forget about that session. And I always thought that was really cool and something I always wanted to be a part of. I always dreamed of having a section in like 10 Street Bros would be insane. But yeah, I mean, I miss that a lot, and I think that's something that is very possible, and maybe it won't get as many likes or clicks or whatever, but I feel like it's a cool thing to remember and look back on and see a full project come together instead of posting 30 seconds at a time or 15 seconds at a time. Where I would like to see skimboarding realistically, I mean, my overall dream right now would be seeing a tour that was hopefully guaranteed decent waves at least on each spot, and I would love to see more riders, which is very difficult, more riders from around the world featured in these well-deserved spots. There's people that are insane that could compare to any of these big names that you see on a regular basis online and could probably show them up, and then they may not even be known yet because they may not have an iPhone like everyone else and being able to share like a social media platform, but they shred. And like guys like Mexico, I was talking to somebody from Costa Rica the other day. I think there's a lot of opportunity to display the sport global. And I guess the next key to the puzzle is trying to figure out how to get everyone together at the same time a few times a year, which is very difficult. Ideas, I mean, I think the other day I was thinking, actually I thought about this in Santa Cruz, I was talking with a few people, is like, it could be interesting, whether it's a UST or any type of group that was interested in doing events, to create events that could count towards the tour, essentially like being a stop, but have it almost be more stops. So there's more opportunity worldwide and open up the door for all these different locations to throw events and have their riders gain points. And then at the end of the year, kind of similar to what the WSL did this year, but instead of 5 riders, maybe have like the top 15 to 20 scores try to meet at like a grand finale location. And even that is probably pretty difficult to pull off, but it seems maybe a little more realistic than where the tour is at right now. But I know there's a lot of like visa issues and stuff like that I think a lot of people are unaware of, and the financial costs, like even to fly within the US is insane. And if you're not covered, it's nearly impossible if you're working even part-time to get that time off. Like all the stops this year, I think there was like maybe 3 weekends in a row, maybe a week in between, which is crazy. If you have to work and want to request work off, like it's asking for a lot. So unless you're really planning to focus your year about being a part of the tour and not expecting to make anything back, which is most likely going to be the case, then go for it. But it's just a tough reality, I think, for most to like go for, you know.
Sunny Boy in the Philippines is, if ever there was a situation that we could claim to be a missed opportunity, it would be Sunny Boy. And like you're saying, you don't think people know about that, and it is precisely that way, especially when you get comfortable in the U.S. doing U.S. only events. But I was thinking he had set a GoFundMe, and I was like, how much, like, we should be able to get this done. How much is and I just looked up flight to Philippines. I forget if it was one way or two way, but I saw the number and I was like, okay, we have definitely a logistics issue, and it's unfortunate that it's that way, and that there seems to be ways in which it's gotten worse in recent years for people to come in and out. If it's, I mean, whatever, if it's a two-way trip, if they have a reason, if they can show like a piece of paper, it's an event, this is what I do, here's my whatever. But government doesn't care. Even if it was a serious sport like surfing or skating, they don't necessarily care. Like it's like Olympics or don't talk to me, essentially, for that stuff. But I want to go back to talk about amateurs a little bit and the future, because one thing that I didn't get to talk to David about, and I'm excited about it and I like to talk about it, is the next generation, which would be basically the generation that's being curated through this next decade, let's say 2020 to 2030. That age group of sort of 9 to 11 with kids like Paul Carey is insane right now. So Paul's a writer for Vic. Like, you got to be real excited for that. What do you see coming from that generation? What are you excited about? And then maybe, like, my question would be like, what do you want to see out of this? This is the opportunity generation. Like right now, you have your opportunity and you're getting a bunch of great clips, and we're all curating this thing. But it's really going to come to a head for those kids in like 2025 or whatever. Where do you think they'll be?
Yeah, it's really interesting knowing how young these kids are and where their skill level is at, and it's a lot of that control, which it should be, is amongst their parents. And I think they're very lucky to have these parents that are willing to take the time to get them to that point. I think if any other rider above that age range were to put as much time as these kids are putting in the water, they could skim like that too. They're disciplined and they want it and they're stoked and they're excited. And that's honestly something that I wish, even like the happiness like factor, that people had a little more of right now, and the excitement. I feel like there's a huge gap of like very serious, which I respect because they're all working really hard, like very serious top tier riders that are making a name for themselves and building a career. And then there's this huge gap in between, like, where do you go from AMs to pros? And then they see the Blairs, the Austins, the top 10 guys that they're like, well, that's not where I'm at, so what's the point, you know? And maybe I'm just saying that and speaking from just how it seems, but I wish there was a little more of a, David mentioned Green Eggs and Am. That was something that I loved, having that platform to feel like I was at that level of intermediate, almost, if you want to call it semi-pro. It was a cool level of competition to feel like, okay, like that's kind of my next goal that I want to do well in. And I feel like that would be cool to see again. These Groms, I mean, they're speaking for themselves. I think it's a very tough line because they're very young, so it's hard to get too much of an idea of like, where are you going to take this, you know, without losing that, like, just have fun with it, you know. And I think that's, since I've been with Vic, I've seen Paul in and out of the shop and in and out of the water much more than I ever have. And it's always been a big thing for me, as much as I knew how much talent and much of a bright future he had as a sport and like as a rider. at the end of the day, I'd always have these conversations with Tex. Maybe I shouldn't say this on camera, but I'm saying it. Is just like never lose that stoke, just have fun, enjoy it, and don't, like, as much as you want to take it. It's like that fine line of like taking something seriously, but don't take it too seriously. Because at the end of the day, this is such a small sport, and if you take it too seriously, you're going to constantly get disappointed because there's so many things that none of us can control that are just out of our range right now. But I will say that this past year, that group of kids from 8 to, I would even say 14, even though the main range there is probably 9 to 11, I think blew a lot of people away. And it finally was that I feel like there was this big gap from Groms to the 18 plus range of like who's going to be next, and they're definitely filling it. So it's really cool to see. Well, there was one that was really cool, and I think that was still the same thing this year, but the Zap Pro-Am, that was kind of one of the first big events that was like, they were kind of invited before semi-pro even became a division, really, from what I remember, if I'm not mistaken. It was something that like almost you got invited into as a like recognizable am name, and that was your opportunity to like get sent out to go to this particular spot, which happened to be in Delaware, put on by Zap, and showcase yourself. And I thought that was a really cool thing to get excited about as a rider, something to work towards. And yeah, I mean, the thing with competitions, though, is unfortunately you need a lot of hands to get it done properly, and planning and permits and all these different things add up to be a lot of stress. And it's just having the people willing to do what they're doing. I mean, there's already only so many events going on, and those people I know grind to get these things done day and night, and it's just purely out of just passion for the sport. And I, like, as much as I wish there was more of that, I understand people have a life and need to make a living, so that's kind of where it's at right now. I will say, though, from seeing how this year went and just like honestly trying to make the best of whatever we could do this year, I mean, the Vic almost didn't happen again. I'm not sure how Oktoberfest was. They were luckily in a little later time slot than we had to get permission to do things this year, but I mean, in all honesty, I think Vic especially wishes we could have put on a much bigger, more official event like usual and had more people traveling in. But I think there was just, because of COVID and a variety of other reasons, like obviously we just tried to make the best of it. And I think it was awesome, the outcome of it, regardless of conditions. It turned out to be really cool. And I think it brought people back together, which was super important for us and what we needed this past year. And it showed that excitement to keep things going. I think this next year, with things getting more comfortable in the world and hopefully things opening up for a lot of international guys to make an appearance again, I think everyone's going to be pretty surprised at where our sport's at. It's every week, I think major things are happening that it's just, you may not notice as much if you're not paying attention, like someone like I am, where I'm constantly like, that's just how I'm feeding my brain right now, is skim related or action sports related content. But yeah, I think it's crazy to see the progression. Like, it's almost going too fast, in my opinion, where there's stuff that's honestly like, I'm like, I never thought that was going to happen, and it just happened. So, like, especially in Laguna, with the waves being so good here on a consistent level, there's things happening almost every week that I think people are going to be shocked by.
Yeah, we should be finally getting like, it is hard to say things progressing too fast, but it is progressing beyond that. We've always been in a state where we're doing things that are really beyond the media coverage and the credit we get, and it is getting to that point, and it's good because eventually it'll follow. As long as we're doing things, it'll eventually follow, it'll eventually work out, because some of those interesting things are, they basically go viral. If you want to talk in modern terms, like stuff that we're doing is going to be going viral. And talking about keeping things fun, and how fun basically is almost another word for like flow state. That is the best way to compete. You hear it time and time and again. whether it's like mountain biking, surfing, or skimboarding. And I think one of the issues that I dislike about the pro-am events or the way we run events is that the schedule is so strict, and it can be hard to keep those fun levels up for essentially a whole day, 2 whole days of a weekend. And the kids do really have that advantage. And like you were saying, it's hard to say where a kid's going to go because everything's pretty fun when you're 10. I mean, things are new, and you hit that teen phase, that high school phase, and maybe for the kids we're talking about, they're basically hitting a pro phase where either they're doing their last AM events and they're just winning and killing it, or they're starting their first pro events, and that's rough. Your first pro year is a big wake-up call from just running AM. And that's why I want to do more jams and see if that'll push people to do some amateur events. Like you said, we really do need green eggs and AM. But even if we can't have green eggs and AM, because that's kind of that's still like a really event-based thing. You need people running at time, money. That's where jams really come in. So what would you like to see out of the community to maybe bring jams back where the fun levels are obviously high? Because there's no reason, if you're not having fun at a jam, maybe it ain't for you, because that is just a fun day of skimming, no like entry fee or anything, and if you do well enough, you get something out of it. So do you think we need some things like that for AMs? And even one of the important things that David was mentioning is it's still technically a contest with a reward structure, but you get to skim in the good waves and maybe be a little bit more selective. It's still jam format, open event, but if you know there's a winner and a loser, if you're just skimming alone, solo sesh, just go forever. It doesn't really care. Nobody's filming. Just do whatever. But if there's a reward structure and you're an AM at a jam event, like, pick the better wave and maybe win the jam and get some rewards for it.
For sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think... trying to think of an incentive besides prizes that would help.
I'd say just money.
Yeah.
Which is awkward.
But yeah.
I mean, my jams are probably going to lean more older, but it's okay because the money is small enough. Like, obviously I don't have some sponsor wealth backing me up to give a bunch of money, but I do like money because, I mean, there's always that thing of like, I could ask for sponsors and get t-shirts and skateboards, and in my mind it's like, I don't want to give you that. If you want a skateboard, you can buy your own. Like, that's a separate thing to skim. What I want to do is give you money, and you decide what that reward is, because it's money. If it's candy and you're like a 10-year-old and you took home $20, $40, $60, buy all that candy. But you earned it. You should feel rewarded. But there's also a part of me that's like, as I give you this money for the AM thing, because not every kid has the same financial support. For me personally, growing up, a contest fee was a conversation with the parents, and it's like, for my jams, it's like, give you money and you can buy candy, but if you want to enter an AM event and it's $40, $60 and you're a kid, you don't just have money lying around. Like, there's your entry fee if you want.
Yeah, I mean, if that money is coming from sponsorships, I guess, or directly from that entry fee, it would work out. It'd also be interesting, it just popped up as you were saying that, like, if it became, I wish there was a little more of an official status of entry to become pro. So it could be interesting to kind of take it into, maybe you earn a wild card spot on the next pro stop or whatever it is, something like that could be pretty cool to really build up, like building a name as a rider, instead of just paying an entry fee to turn pro. And I think that could be pretty cool to really like get that top spot or even top 4 spots that could open up. to where you make it almost like a little more of a reward to turn pro instead of just like anyone could do it. I think that could be interesting to build up some hype. But yeah, I mean, any event, I think if anyone were to show up, small or big, they'll have a good time. I mean, even the Vic is a great example of terrible conditions and everyone making the best of it and just being all together. We're gonna have a good time. So yeah, I think it's a great idea. I think it's just getting it together and making it happen is the toughest part. Especially when it comes to, like, I would love to see more events in Laguna because there's so many good spots, but it's really difficult to get permits for these spots. And I'm sure that's the case for a lot of other places. So it makes putting on something official a little more out of reach. But I mean, kind of off topic, but also kind of on point. I've been really into watching a lot of Stab magazines, film stuff, and some of the content they're putting out, as well as I would relate the same to the Barracks and some of the skate stuff that's been put out, is very creative formats to show essentially surfing, skating, you could say skimming, but in a almost like game format, if that makes sense. I feel like there's a little space for that where we could, I mean, one of the coolest things that they just did, Mason Ho, Mikey February, and Dane Reynolds got sent to Perfect Surf Mexico and essentially had this mock 100 heat, and it was just so entertaining to see these guys in good waves. And it's just, I think even building hype around like how skating used to have, what they call them, where like teams would go around and stop at skate shops and do a little like put out a frickin' rail and you know, show up at the crowd and pass around stickers. Like, I wish there was a little more of that to build up some hype, and I feel like that's kind of missing right now. And the biggest reason I wish there was more of that is to inspire these Groms. I think, like, going back to this 9 to 11 range, like, these kids are definitely going to get their friends stoked, and I miss more, like, when I used to skim on the Laguna and be their age, like, there were so many more people skimming, and it's kind of weird to see now how, as much as I think there's a very strong group skimming, it just seemed like the numbers were much higher. And I think a big part of it is social media and just people getting glued to their phones and finding other things to excite them. But hopefully that boosts up again and draws some excitement. But yeah, I mean, kind of going back into the contest too, I think I'm starting to kind of lean more towards, I think pro and am events need to be separated. And mostly because the days are so long that by the time you're done, you're over it. Like, it's just such a long day, and you've been shooting the last two events that are literally going the entire day. You want to put that out as quickly as possible. You're grinding for like literally 48 hours straight, pretty much, if not longer. And it's a lot on your mind. You get exhausted, you get moody, you like, it's just not as enjoyable. So I think if everything were to be shortened a little bit and it was a hype on just like the Vic Am contest, and they know they're going to get decent conditions for most of it, compared to knowing that they're going to get the worst conditions because pros are going to take advantage. I think that could be interesting, but also, once again, going into more time needed, more money needed, but just like more people to be there for that opportunity kind of thing. But I think if enough people were to get excited and be interested in being a part of that, it could happen. And I don't know if that's the right way to go, but I think it could be interesting. But yeah, that's kind of, I don't know if that branched off into kind of what you were saying about the jams, but hopefully it helped.
That brings me to a point that I actually didn't bring up with David because I think it would be too easy for him to shoot down. But I wanted to ask you what your opinion is. So if we're talking about pro events, how you get in, the format of them, if they're pro only. One thing I've been really interested lately is the mostly round one format of 3 people to advancing. Do you like man on man, 3-man to advance, or 4-man to advance? And let's kind of put aside logistics for this, more thought experimenting. If you were to run an event what would you do? Maybe limit the number of people, be a bit more selective pro-wise, and just go man on man. Let's assume it's a pro-only event. Or would you want to open it up, have those people a little bit more comfortable for AMs to come in and have that round one and do the 4-man heats? Or do you think the 3-man... I don't like the 3-man. I can't even explain why, but it almost feels like a tweener solution. I know the numbers probably just work out better for seeding and whatnot, but it just feels like a tweener thing of what you kind of have to do with a pro-am event. But it just seems weird to spend a whole round knocking out one dude and putting 2 dudes into a total next round. So you could even say like 2-man versus 4-man. What do you prefer, at least for round one? Because final it would be nice if they were man on man.
2-man's stressful to me off the back. For example, I think the Delaware contest I did this year might have gone straight into man-on-mans. I know Santa Cruz definitely was straight into man-on-mans. And it's just tough because a lot of that, depending on how many people are in the event, it's luck of the draw. So depending on where you're, like if it's UST, if you're ranked a certain position, like that's all preset. There's no unless you're not ranked, that's when it becomes kind of random. But everything is just like, it's very interesting once I kind of figured that out. It's all just where your name is on that list. And I think I was thinking about that with this year. I think starting, unless they want to continue basing each beginning of the year off of the previous year's results, it could be interesting to have like a preliminary heat, kind of like they have in surfing, to kind of open up how those heats are based instead of basing it off of previous year's rankings. But once that gets started, it should be based off that year, in my opinion. Where did I just go with my thoughts? Getting lost and thinking about too many things at once.
Don't worry, I'll splice everything.
Oh, the 2-3 thing. I think a lot of that too goes into the 2-man, 3-man, even 4-man, is based off of how many people sign up and how much time there is, unfortunately. First couple rounds, I think I would rather see more 3-man just for like the opportunity of knowing you have a chance a little more compared to like it's all or nothing. But I think once it winds down, especially to like top 8, I think it's pretty cool to see how it just structures out and where things should be. And I think like, especially if there's a race going on between first and second in the tour or whatever, like as long as they don't match up and can meet in the end, I think that's freaking rad. But yeah, you never know. I mean, this year was super interesting because Oktoberfest is a perfect example. Most of all the events that took place this year were on the East Coast, so it was probably 90% East Coast riders that were dominating the rankings this year. And to see them come over here for the first second West Coast, I guess if it counted, West Coast event, but it was much more of a list of names that was involved, where most of these guys weren't ranked, so it was just completely based off of the past 3 years, if not even more, that were backtracking scores and rankings and whatnot to place them into a certain one. I think there was like 27 to 30 riders in Oktoberfest, maybe a little off, but like I mean, from very beginning, there was crazy heats that probably would have, if there was more consistency throughout the year of riders going to every stop, it would have been a little different. But it made things very interesting, for sure. I wish there was a little bit of separation between certain names this year, but I mean, there was nothing. It was just following the format, which is respectable, I guess. But yeah, I mean, the 2-man, 3-man, I think, the first couple rounds, I think 3-man's just a little more enjoyable as a rider and competitor, just so you know you have an opportunity to at least get by. But I guess you could say the same about 2-man. But it just feels, mentally, I just feel like it feels a little more easygoing, I guess. But yeah, kind of how I feel there.
Yeah, it's like 66.66%.
Yeah. Also, think this is kind of backtracking, but I forgot to mention this with the 5-wave total thing. One of the biggest reasons they wanted that rule this year was to separate scores more, and interestingly enough, it was just as close, if not even closer, to comparing to 3-wave. And I look back at that purposely. It's just statistically to see how it panned out. And I think that comes more into scoring, of just spreading things out a little more. But it was very interesting to see, like, the reason we did that was to add a little more variety in overall scores, and it still came out to be within a point, if not less, for people to advance.
I think that's a little reverse psychology thing. Yeah, I don't think that would work, because I look into I think in a human judging element, they want this, you have 5-wave total and you have left-right rule, and you have bad conditions. You look at the riders, and as a judge, you're just a human, and you just look and you're like, you see somebody, they go for their left, wasn't very, or front, they go for their front side, wasn't very good, and you like feel like you got to give them something. I much prefer, like, I think Exile did the 3-wave total, and that's an improvement. And then I'm like, let's just go straight to the 2-wave total. I don't even care. And it might even help, maybe, because David was talking about one thing that makes judging challenging, on top of the fact that there might be a judging issue scoring wise. I mean, you're just sitting there, and I guess this goes against my 4-man heat thing, but you have your 3-man heat, and you're just entering scores. And I mean, maybe at the beginning of the day you're doing well, but at some point in that day you're starting to phone it in a bit more, and you're working in more of an averages state, as opposed to at the beginning of the day you might be like, dang, what was that? How do I want to set that for the rest of the day? I would love to go to 2-wave heat total and just really push. Yeah, I mean, really push. Like, you got a good wave, bam, 7s and 8s in, and you turned on a wave as a pro, boom, 2. Yeah, why'd you even do it? Wait for the bigger waves, and I think it would actually solve the other problem of, like, there's too many waves. Well, motivate them to go on less waves, because I watched Oktoberfest, especially towards the end when the conditions start petering out with wind, and man, dudes they're just going to go, you know. It's hard to, when the waves aren't perfect, it's more of what you're making of it, and you're just filling scores, and it's like, why not just wait for the right wave?
I completely agree with that. Yeah, I mean, one of the best things that I think was brought up by David about judging is, and this is nothing against the judges, but it's just the reality of how fast things are going down, and even worse in the AMs, because those kids are going nonstop, or like the elder crowd, the older you get, I feel like, are taking their breath a little longer. And it is so tough to even mentally, like, really give a solid answer. I mean, and this is, like he said, it's try it. I mean, for anyone, there's always judging opportunity available, more so for the AMs. I mean, this is something that people can even do with their friends, is sit down with a group of 5, have 3 judges and 2 riders in the water, and just mess around and see what it's like. And after 3 heats, you get mentally exhausted. And I heard a lot of these guys, especially now that we're going on to this iPad format, a lot of these guys are a bit older, and they're not used to looking at a screen all day like a lot of your younger guys are. And it's exhausting, and it's draining, and you get over it, and it's just like, you know, you want to do the best, but it's a lot mentally to really thoroughly do it properly. The priority thing, I think, would be a huge improvement. That is something I will say, when I did the tour on the East Coast for my first year, that I think it was 2015 or 16, doesn't really matter. But that was something they actually were really good at over there, is they had someone calling out who was going, what direction they were going, and then they also have another person with that jersey color going up, like red's going left, and then that focus was there. And if they had priority, that's, regardless of anyone else going, that's where that main focus is going to be. And I think that's another thing. For example, I saw a couple clips of waves from this past weekend where two riders would get really solid scores on the same wave, but realistically it could have been scored the exact same, but for whatever reason somebody else would get a higher score. And I find that very interesting, especially depending on who had priority there. I feel like that should be where the main focus is at, no matter where that person is on the beach. And that's just something that's very tough. I mean, if you're, for example, let's say somebody is riding, like they always say, it's something I've always heard throughout of competing and skimming is, oh, like make sure to skim in front of the judges, which does make sense because that's the direct right in front of them zone where they're going to see everything that's going on compared to Levick, for example. If you can picture that, like let's say I see something on the way south end, like I may be called out like, okay, Johnny going way deep down south, like they may be focused on something else and pan over like, okay, what do you do? Like, and not catch the whole thing, you know? So you're missing a lot of that score. So I think the priority thing could be a huge improvement. And that's just, unfortunately, that's another job to be filled that you'd have to hire the couple people at least that are willing to put in, same with the judges, an entire day of work for not very much money if you're even getting paid at all. But that could be very interesting. I think that could help a lot on this side.
Well, I would go further. I wish, especially with skimboarding, you can't get into a place where you stop people from going. But I almost wish we open it up because it's a wave sport, and you want everybody to have opportunity, especially if there's some issue with rights and lefts and what opportunities there are. But I wish it would be more like, you know, we can't, but more like a surf event like Pipeline. I just bring that contest area, close it in, tell the guys, okay, we're doing 2 wave totals. We don't ideally want you going when another guy's going. If it has priority, let him go. And if you happen to have it, if your wave's all the way right and all the way left, then you can go. We've closed it in, so we'll see it. But ideally, you know, whoever has priority goes, or whoever has the best wave opportunity goes, and then we can really push up those scores and handle, like, sort of talking about how a 5 wave total was a move to help things. You do need to, when you want to fix things, you almost never want it to be like, okay, riders, come here, tell me. I'm gonna talk to you about how you should skim. No, you gotta think of rule sets. It's always with humans, you gotta think of rule sets, changes to the format. You have to essentially force them to do it. You can't, you know, like, hey, we have a interference rule, so you really shouldn't interfere with somebody, and then somebody goes and does it. Well, now you gotta call them on it, and you can't let them get away.
Yeah, I mean, I think that'd be awesome too, to make people more picky about what they're going for as well. It would slow down the heat, and when it would really go down to like not wasting that opportunity to go for the wrong wave. I think a lot of the times the reason, more so in pros I would say, go for the same waves is because waves may be very far and few, so it's just anything that's coming, they're going for it and not really thinking about priority or anything like that. It's just an opportunity to get a good score, so they're going to go. But it would be very interesting, I think, and almost kind of cool, because it'd bring in a lot more of that competitive factor, and it'd really make that real strong to, like you're saying, where, like, not saying that you should completely lose a score maybe, but like maybe you do get an interference call if you go on the same wave, and that'd make things very interesting to not go at the same time. I think it'd be very hard, thinking about it right now, it'd be very hard to get that trained more so for the AMs, especially the younger guys, and have them understand that and why that is. But kind of going back to separating pro and AM events, I think it'd be pretty cool for the pros, because I think that's something that we could discipline ourselves on, and it'd make things very interesting. To the point of even like, not that I ever agree with blocking in surf contests, but it does. I mean, it's a tool and it's a rule, and people use it and it works, and it's kind of cool in a way. But I'm not saying I respect it as a rider, but it does make things very interesting.
Yeah, I think maybe when I took like a really neutral stance on it, on first episode, but obviously I mentioned Medina, and that's gonna right away people are like, I don't like competitive surfing because of the way he approaches it, and I'll be like, I agree with that totally, but still, like, you can't say that when you great example. So in a competitive surfing format, the like pipe, I don't think it was the Masters, it might have been the other one, it might have been Pipe Masters or the Vulcan, but one of them with John and Jamie O'Brien. I don't know if you remember this clip, but Jamie has priority, and so he's he has priority, so he's blocking and he's kind of dictating. I mean, the ocean goes dead, and he has his point total. It's like another pipe win in the bag, and then John's kind of waiting, and then he bolts and then he goes. He's off priority, and Jamie O'Brien's literally paddling after him. John gets like the wave of the event, and I mean, literally, I think that wins the entire event. And it's like, let's have moments like that. I don't want them. I mean, and if you want to talk about competitive skimboarding, I'm not going to name names. There's dudes like that. We know who skims like that. We know who enters a contest in a very competitive way, and it's like, would I skim that way, or do I agree with it or not? Doesn't really matter. When they're in a heat, am I watching? You bet your ass I'm watching that heat. That element of competitive, because usually we're not that competitive, and
it's a big part of the reason why those guys do so well, is they know how to compete and they know how to bring that edge. And there's so many mind games that I think people will play without even other people realizing. I think that stuff's funny in a way, and it does work to some point. But yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, I mean, everyone, from what it seems like, is a bro to each other. We all appreciate each other. I think at the end of the day, no matter what, we respect the fact that we're here because we love skimboarding. And these guys that are really good at competing and get like that and kind of push others away, I think it just comes down to just knowing like they really want it, regardless of how much they're making and what it may mean to them. I mean, all these guys that have won tour, won big events, like, there was a drive in them that was incomparable to a lot of other riders. And I think that's something that takes, if you want to call it champion or whatever, it's that work and that dedication, that drive, and that like animalistic energy to like not care about who else you're against, and if it's your best friend or whatever, your bro that you grew up with. Like, at the end of the day, they want to win. And that's, yeah, a lot of people don't have that. I would say I'm not a big person of having that. But it does make things very interesting. It makes it exciting for sure. Yeah, and it's intimidating for sure, and it's easy to get in your head against those guys. But yeah, it's fun at the same time.
Talking about media, and you know, watching some of your clips that you released this week during the swell, is there something you would like to do personally, not talking about skimboarding, with media, whether it's, you know, whatever you want, whether it's YouTube channel, whether it's a more full feature? I think the gold standard would be Weber's video with Skylar Wilson. Would you like to work towards that, where it's, I mean, that's hard because you need somebody who's right hand man with you, and right hand woman with you, getting all those clips and being there. Like, if you say Wedge is on, they're there. If you say Eliso's on, they're there. And then they have to do it for no money, and then maybe see the result later. So and I don't want to paint it in a bad light, because that is my favorite video. I'm just saying, what direction would you like to go personally for media stuff, knowing there's a bunch of different avenues and they all have their benefits, and you can kind of do them all at the same time, but maybe what's best for you and best for your sort of image in skimboarding?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, honestly, a lot of my ideas I'm still like highly considering, so I don't want to give too much away without saying I'm going to do something and then hopefully never doing it. And I'm not saying this is the right way that people should do things. This is kind of how I see things and what I like and how I would like to be seen. I've thought about it all. I've reached this age, I think, where a channel for me, I think I would rather do something more, if I were to do, first word I would say is more comedic, if anything. Not as much like face to face, which I know is what everyone wants to see, but I'm much more of like, if anyone follows any of these guys, or some examples that I really like, and not saying that I compare myself to them at all. But Julian Wilson, for instance, has always been one of my favorite surfers. He's a little more to himself in a way, where it's this little more artistic style, I think, and his videos are short and to the point and a little more artsy and show more of the culture of where he's traveling, which I think is rad, and I wish I could show much more of that. That stuff means more to me than I think a lot of this like weekly, here's what I'm doing today and making the best of it. However, Blair, for example, I mean, has been on such a grind where it's kind of insane to see every week he's coming out with something where I would be stoked if I did that even once in that year. You know, like that would be my year's accomplishment, and he's doing these things every week. Traveling, doing great, like he's gotten to this point where, I mean, it's the dream life in a way, where you get to have these people from big places give you these opportunities that no one ever expected, and he's able to take those limits to places that I don't think anyone's even thought of this past year. He did things this past year that I don't even know if it's been put out yet, that I was like, no one thought about that. And he's just like, it's gotten to the point where he's able to be so creative because he just has everything right there for him. The opportunity, the filmer, and these are all things that come at an expense, obviously, but he's built a team, is how I would put it, from his sponsors to who's supporting him to how he's getting that support, and the people that he's affiliated with himself and able to collab with those people. It's pretty wild to see. And I'm not just saying Blair, like I would say the same about a lot of other people that have built a really big name for themselves. And I think that's what's really cool. It's come down to collaborating and not making it so much of a one-man show anymore. And Blair's done a really good job about that and showing these kids and all these other riders, more so in Laguna because that's where he's located. But I'm sure if he went somewhere else, you'd see a lot of other talent. And that's something that I wish or hope more people do. And don't compare yourself to the top, but just do it because you love it. Do it, like, create your own channel from where you're from. I want to see more on the East Coast. I want to see more from around the world and what people are up to and how they skim and what their drive down to the beach is like. I think that's rad. Maybe not so much how I would want to present myself, but I think I want to, like, how I spend my time after I get off, which is sad because I'm like addicted to it, is seeing what's new on YouTube. What does Stab put out? What does Barracks put out? And it seems like it's almost daily now that they're putting out new videos, which is crazy to me. And I think we could get close to that same point from how much talent there is around the world. And I think it'd be rad.
Yeah, seeing Austin had his channel, and I don't know if he ever really vlogged out. He'll talk and maybe do some intro outros, but it's still more of it's almost destination feature. It's or event feature. It's really more. It's almost, I don't want to say it's not about him. It's clearly about him, but it's really about like what he's doing. And Blair is like, he could eat a bagel sandwich and put it on YouTube, and kids would be like,
that's exactly it too. I mean, I think it really does come down to the person they are. Like, first person that comes to mind, Teddy Velasquez. I'd spent a lot of time with that guy traveling. That guy would be hilarious if he had his own channel. And it would be so entertaining. Even if there was a minute of skim every week, it would be the most entertaining thing ever. And that's just not throwing. I'm sure I could say a list of 20 names right now that I feel the same way about. But yeah, I mean, that goes back into the whole. It's a way to display yourself, and then and that's another reason why I just don't feel like I'm that person to be that way. You know, like Blair earned that name through years of dominating the skim scene. You know, like I'm still put myself on the C tier, if anything, trying to build up from there. But and that's kind of why I've never really taken it too seriously to try to make my own channel. But now it's like, you know what, like, who knows, maybe I'll do, like, I think it'd be cool, like, why I like Julian Wilson stuff is he's done like series where it's like he'll do 7 episodes and each episode is a different location. I think that's really cool. So it's a little more like structured and I don't know. Artistic, I think I really like the more artistic stuff. Has always stood out to me to just do something different. But yeah, it's kind of how I feel.
That would be. I think that's a good idea. 'Cause David and I we didn't really want to go into media too much. We didn't necessarily touch. But speaking of what you're thinking of, like I'm the same way. I don't want to vlog. Just doing this is like a lot for me. But a really cool skim series, and it would be something you could do it either way. You could either do it in a more Julian Wilson way, more artistic, or you could go straight for, this might be before your time, but like the old drive-through surf video series.
Yeah, that's right.
I mean, get the boys in a camper van or something, get the Vic team, get you and Vlassies, go NorCal to SoCal,
Exactly.
get somebody on the camera and film it.
That's also that's a huge thing. I think if we want to talk about like what team you ride for, I think that's a very like lost thing, you know. But that would be a cool thing to like. I think Zap's kind of doing that in a way, and how they're running the East Coast is they all hop in that Zap van and go dominate whatever stop they gotta go to, and they make an impression on everyone. And I think that's rad, and I feel like that's something we could do over here too. But yeah, I definitely agree with that, and I think it'd be so much fun, and it'd make it more inviting for these kids, like Santa Cruz, for example. Right when I was getting in, like taking competing seriously, I was like, I don't know anything about Santa Cruz, but like, how can I, like, where can I stay? And we camped, and we drove up there, and it's a long freaking drive for your first time, and we made the best of it, and I still will say that's one of my favorite trips, just based off of the experiences I've had. And like I said, most of the time I've been up there, the waves weren't the best for the contest, but the vibes are all time. And like clicking how everything just did this past event, it was just, it really made everything like come together in the best way possible.
NorCal is one of my favorite little skim communities, and there's different. The big one is Santa Cruz, and then you have like the really cool smaller one in San Francisco, and then you even have a more spaced out like Central California, and that place is great, and that's what would make it good for like the drive-through series, because as long as surfing's been around, they still drove that coast and like found some stuff. And imagine doing that with skimming, because most people don't even know to like look for it.
Yeah.
Just clicked on me. Something that I think actually Skid Kids was doing before COVID happened was the vlog style while on tour, and I think that's such a cool way to see these guys that are doing the tour and their experience, and also like what their side sessions are like. And like the WSL this year, I got very into following all these guys that have their own channels and seeing their tour experience and what that is like as an athlete. And like it also inspires me as a skimboarder to be like, how do I get to even close to that level? One of my favorite up-and-comers, if you want to call him up-and-comers, he's been killing it for a while now, but Griffin Colapento, I thought, had one of the most insane years this year, and he also seemed to be having the most fun. And that's my ideal picture of what I would like. And it's just him traveling with the boys and having a good time, and then when he needs to show up and blow up, he's there, and he's ready, and he's training, but he's also having a good time doing it. And I think that's like my ultimate goal right now as a rider. But yeah, I mean, that drive-through, just looking back at that, that's a great example. And it's so easy to do too. Like that's an easy one for anyone, even as AMs, to be like, hey, we're hopping in this van. Like I'd love to see that stuff right now. I don't care who you are. Even if the waves aren't good, I'd like that journey is worth doing it alone.
It's exactly like you're saying. I can't even, the amount of surf videos I've watched in my day, and at this point in my life, like I don't really remember too many surf clips, but I could almost recall every like great moment on the drive-through series. That's just, it's a human element that it goes beyond surfing. Like if there was a comedy YouTube series that was like that, you'd enjoy it without the surfboards. Didn't even have to have it.
Yeah, and like the older I've gotten, like that's just where I'm at now. Like I know that I took I know that I took things too seriously when I was younger. When I turned pro, then that just came from just really wanting it. And I look back now and I'm like, I just wasn't even at that level, especially mindset level, to even be where I wish I was. But now I see what's standing out in all these brands that I like, and the reasons I like all these things and these different riders is because I can tell that they love doing what they're doing. And at the end of the day, that's really all that I think matters. And these guys that Gabriel Medina is a perfect example. It's like, yeah, he didn't make the best impression of himself, but at the end of the day, that guy worked so freaking hard to get to where he's at. And I would say the same about guys like Lucas Fink and Gerardo, who I wanted to shout out this episode. Those guys worked harder than I think most have ever worked to get to the point that they got to, and they proved themselves, and they continue to prove themselves, even though they've gotten to what I would consider the top level of how you could be awarded as a skimboarder. And I think that's freaking awesome. But yeah, it's that, like I said, that fine line of taking things seriously but also really enjoying it.
All right. Is there anything you want to go over, maybe that you had wanted to talk about that maybe we didn't?
I mean, I definitely want to shout out Gerardo for sure. I think what he accomplished this past year, even though I think there was a big handful of names that could have made a difference, I think he still would have been right where he's at right now. Regardless of how things panned out this year, that guy has skimmed incredibly well and continues to blow people's minds on a daily basis by how much time he's spending in the water, how he's taking care of himself. You can see his drive and his passion, and I think that really is remarkable to me, and that's something that I think a lot of us idolize and respect. And it's especially coming from Mexico, where these kids are, like, the first time I went down to mainland where he's from, like, I was blown away by these kids. They're riding boards that most people would turn in and call dumpsters, like trash boards, and they're ripping on these things, pulling combos to like huge heavy wrap barrels, and it blew me away. And it's really put you in perspective of like, man, do I need this $700 board under my feet to like skim well? And it's wild to me, but I think it's freaking awesome to see guys that didn't have the same opportunity as others climb their way to the top, because it's not easy, and it's definitely well deserved, and he killed it this year and previous years, and I'm sure it'll continue to go on. So yeah, I really shout out Gerardo, because that was freaking awesome to see happen this year.
All right, thanks for coming on, and good luck in applying all those
yeah, we'll see what happens. Thanks for having me, man. This has been awesome. I'm sure I'll think about a bunch more, but it'll come later.